Back for our third video in our maintenance series today. And why not learn from those who have been able to maintain weight for the long term? Well, we're in luck because there have actually been a couple of studies looking at this very thing, including one systematic review looking at people who lost weight and kept it off and those who did not, and identifying some of the common characteristics of these particular groups. So this is one really important topic, so make sure you pause everything else that you're doing because we have a chance to learn from the success of others. Now, I do want to preface this by saying that research has still not shown that any one diet has emerged as the best diet for weight loss, maintenance, or adherence. So the bottom line here is that you need to take an approach that works for you, both in the short term and in the long term, which means that it needs to be in a sustainable approach, and obviously an approach that supports whatever goals you may be after. Now, there were a lot of characteristics that were identified in this particular study that I'm going to be highlighting, but for briefness, I'm just gonna talk about some of the ones that stood out to me, starting with self-monitoring. Now, activities that fell under self-monitoring included things like being cognitive of portion size, um, and even though maybe calorie tracking is not a must to maintain, a lot of people did report that they did calorie track. And an interesting thing to note here is that people in this study said that meal tracking actually gave them a way to enjoy eating out while still hitting their goals and staying within their calorie budget. Now, I know for me personally, this is definitely one thing that I enjoy about calorie tracking. Not that I calorie track all the time, um, but I do calorie track either when I'm in a deficit and shooting for a particular goal or at the beginning of maintenance. Um, and I will go back to calorie tracking if I find that my weight is not doing what it needs to be doing, uh, just to recreate some of that awareness. But back to this point in terms of being able to enjoy things a little bit more because of calorie tracking. You know, I actually did this a couple of weeks ago when I went out for my first beer in a month and a half. I had tracked, the for the day, and I was able to just identify what kind of beer I could have and fit in for that day. And I left having enjoyed the environment and also a beer and not feeling at all, guilty. Um, Another form of self-monitoring that was talked about here was weighing food out. Now, all of us have a tendency to do two things. Um, Underestimate how much we move and overestimate how much we eat. So investing in a food scale and other measuring tools for the kitchen will come in extremely handy. Now, and I know that measuring food out may seem cumbersome, but believe me, it helps. And just like anything else, it quite simply just gets easier the more you do it. I personally have my food scale out on the counter, so it's in plain sight. One thing I've mentioned before about building habits, not necessarily in this series, but just in general, is the idea of creating less friction between you and the positive habits that you're trying to implement. And for me, this is just having the food scale out on the counter and in plain sight is just a form of creating less friction. Another finding was that successful maintainers were also very good about meal prepping, which is another form, again, of self-monitoring in a way. If you aren't meal prepping, just start small. I think a good place to begin is at least prepping your protein because, protein can be kind of hard, especially if you're just making last minute decisions to come by, while carbs and fats are a little bit easier to handle. Now, another characteristic here that was talked about with successful maintainers was meal planning and regular meal rhythm. So what do I mean by meal rhythm? Well, don't confuse that with meal frequency, but what I mean is um, that successful maintainers were consistent with the times that they ate throughout the day. Um, so if you find yourself not currently eating at regular times throughout the day, on most days, maybe practice setting an alarm, even putting it in your calendar, which I know seems crazy, but can help you, I think, make that commitment to yourself if you treat it like you would any other appointment. I think most of you know by now that I work, full time at a university where I've been the last 12 years. And even though that I've been in the same position, I've actually worked 3 or 4 different shifts. And each time that I had a shift change, um, I had to go about finding a new meal rhythm. And so what I did personally was put my meal times in my calendar, and again treated it like any other important appointment, like that I maybe would have with like a boss, a coworker, a friend, etc. Now, as far as meal planning, this could look like, if you're going out to eat, maybe researching the menu and deciding ahead of time what you're going to order and how perhaps you're going to handle the leftovers. Um, I do this personally when, if I go out, to the bar, most of the time I plan, and I tell myself I'm going to order 2 beers, then immediately close my tab and set myself up for better success in terms of not going overboard. Now, does it work all the time? No, but most of the time it does. And again, we're not talking about perfection, we're just talking about consistency. Another example of meal planning, the holidays are coming up and they happen every single year. They don't just come out of nowhere. So, because they're to be expected, we have a great opportunity to go into that particular season with a plan. And this isn't to say that you don't need to enjoy the food and festivities, but you can do so with some moderation. And oftentimes, in order to make sure that we are moderating there, we do need to have a plan of action. I think most of us enjoy ourselves a lot more when we haven't overindulged on things. Another big thing that stood out to me in this study, in terms of people that were able to maintain their weight, is that these people remained active. In maintenance, you still have to continue to make a commitment to your workouts, walking, or finding a way to move on a daily basis. These workouts certainly may involve a little less volume, but they still remain extremely important, not only to long-term maintenance, but also to our long-term health. Now, there were a few other characteristics that I wanted to quickly touch on that aren't listed on this slide, but intrinsic and extrinsic motivation was a big one. People who were able to maintain their weight, they really viewed this process of weight loss and maintenance as a reinvention of themselves. The bottom line here is that if you don't view all these changes that you're making as a lifestyle change, you go back to your old behaviors, it's very likely that you're going to regain the weight because you're no longer practicing the behaviors that got you to the point that you want to be at in the first place. Another thing was goal setting and continuous reevaluation. So if you remember the weekly reset that I sent over, this was several weeks back. Go back and look at that document because I sent it over for a reason. And I do think that it's extremely important to revisit our goals and identify our ever-changing barriers so that we can better plan for the week or at least the month and how we're going to, what action plan we're going to use to work around those particular barriers. This is especially important maybe if you're going through a big life change, whether it's moving to a new a different city or a different state or changing jobs, etc. But I also think it's important that we not just, revisit, barriers and reestablish goals, but we also look at what we're doing well and continue to build on those particular positives. Other things were social support. One of the reasons I have the group is so that we can hopefully provide social support. So, I know it's sometimes like pulling teeth to get people to engage with each other. So if there's something better that I can do in terms of approaching the group forum, I would love to hear your ideas, because I really want the group to be there for this particular type of reason, of that social support that I think a lot of people need and desire. Also, another trait of those who were able to maintain weight was enduring challenges. So those who were able to endure different challenges, things like maybe a divorce or a death of a loved one, etc. The fact that they had a lot of this structure in place really helped them to navigate these types of life events. Now, looking on the flip side, those who were not able to successfully maintain had a tendency, one, to binge eat and give in to peer pressure. To me, this is where meal planning and prepping can really come into play, as well as self-monitoring. When we meal plan, we are less likely to give in to peer pressure, but planning also, I think, requires thinking about how maybe you're going to handle these situations. This is not to say that every so often you can't give in, but in reality, if this is going to work for you, you need to let your peers know what your goals are and have a plan for how you're going to handle, for example, maybe a friend asking you out for dinner and drinks. Maybe it's saying, well, how about I head home and have my normal meal and I'll meet you for one nightcap. Or it could be saying, not tonight, but moving forward with actually setting a date and with that person for another day, so that you can just better plan and prepare. This is all to say that you are really in control. You have a lot more control than what I think some of you might think. And you can take control and compromise on what approach you want to take in a way that still sets you up for success, while I think still allowing you to enjoy life and your friends. Now, another characteristic of unsuccessful maintainers was passive reaction to barriers, and this is a big one. Now, this isn't to downplay anyone's barriers, but we do all have barriers, and some I know are going to be harder to work around than others. But I think for most of these barriers, there's a detour. I think I've talked about this before. Go into every week having a plan B. Don't have too many plans, because I think that's just allowing you to draw things out and have too many outs, if you know what I mean. But if plan A doesn't work, I think most of the time plan B will. And if plan B doesn't work for whatever reason, then just move on. I had this happen the other week when I had to go into work last minute on a Sunday. And it was something that I was totally out of the blue. I wasn't at all expecting it. And typically my plan B would be either just to move my workout, my planned workout, either before or after. But in this particular situation, I was going to be getting home really, really late. And sure, perhaps I could have made it work. But at the same time, I was trying to be smart about knowing that I was going to be going into a workout tired. And, sometimes there's no point in having an extremely unproductive workout and also risking injury. So what I did was just say, oh, well, and then I got back on track the very next day. So key there, have a plan B. If you need help identifying a plan B, message me. That's what I'm here for. But a plan B might look like, It might not even be just moving a workout to a different time. It might make maybe shortening the workout, or doing maybe you can't make it to the gym, but you still find a way to stay active, maybe by going for just a 20-minute walk, or jog, or walking the dog. So what I want you to do is just take an honest look at yourself. What characteristics do you still need to work on? Which ones are you doing well? If you're demonstrating more characteristics of unsuccessful maintainers, know that all is not lost. So, if there are any habits that you feel like that you need to work on that perhaps strike a chord, it's never too early and it's never too late to start that work. My job is to set you up not just for short-term success, but for long-term success. So let's make it happen and continue to put in the work towards better health, a better future, so that you can continue to give to those you love.